So please welcome everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here, for your willingness to hear what I have to say. And what I have to say is something in a way rather basic from the standpoint where I stand from systemic functional linguistics, and from that basic stuff that I'm going to talk about, I'll then develop into certain aspects, not that basic, that you can make use as language teachers, foreign language teachers, and particularly English as a foreign language teacher. So my starting point is systemic functional linguistics. Okay? Systemic functional linguistics is also known as systemic functional grammar. What's the difference between grammar and linguistics? Linguistics is a more general designation. So if you say systemic functional linguistics, you're using a more general designation. You're not restricted to the study of grammar and to describing grammar structure. Okay? So we can start from here, which is asking what is systemic functional linguistics. Okay? You can ask a question like this: what is systemic functional grammar or systemic functional linguistics? Using grammar because it's more restricted here. What is systemic functional grammar? Asking this question exactly as someone who asks what is Darwin's theory of the evolution of species, or what is quantum physics. If you ask these questions, you expect to get an answer that you can understand. Okay? So we can say that systemic functional grammar is, on the one hand, a theory of grammatical description, and in that sense, as a theory of grammatical description, it describes natural languages, it describes linguistic systems. So you can describe English. English has been fully described in systemic functional terms. So you can describe English, but you can also describe Portuguese, you can also describe Spanish. It's a system that describes language. It's a theory that describes language. So it's a theory of grammatical description that describes natural languages. Can't you hear me up back there? You don't? You need a mic? Yeah. That's terrible. I can't stand still. That's the problem. I can't stand still. And if you want me to be there, then I will look like a preach in a church. If I move up here, because I need to move, if I move up here, can't you listen to me? For instance, if I'm staying here, can't you listen, everybody? Okay, I'll go and move around like this and you all listen to me. Yeah? Can you listen?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Okay. You don't? Who said I don't? You're just teasing me, I guess. Second possibility, okay, in systemic functional grammar is also an instrument, a model for textual analysis, okay? So you can use systemic functional grammar in two different ways. One, as a theory of grammatical description. Two, as an instrument, a model for textual analysis, okay? So this is what systemic functional grammar is. But this is what systemic functional grammar is in a very simple way, okay? So we'll be learning what this is, in fact, shortly. But theory of grammatical description, instrument model for language analysis. For language teachers, it is a powerful instrument because you can use it as a language teacher. You can use it both ways. You use it to teach grammar because it's a theory of grammatical description. You use it to teach grammar for your students, grammatical structures, but you can also use it and use the same meta-language to perform text analysis, okay? So it is, for you, a very powerful instrument, a very powerful thing to work with. Now, what is meant by text, because this is important in systemic functional linguistics, what is meant by text in SFL or in SFG? A text is a piece of language use. It is language that is functional. When we talk about language use, we're talking about functional aspects of the language. So language that performs functions in certain contexts, okay? So a text, in this sense, for us, a text has to be a piece of language use, language that is functional, okay? So in that sense, a text is, for instance, what we are producing here, okay? What is going on here, at the end, if you record it and you transcribe it, you have a text. So texts are products, what comes out of situations of interaction between people, okay? So a text is language that is functional, and in that sense, a text has several characteristics. A text is what we produce when communicating. You can take all the pictures you like, but I can give you all these. Okay? A text is what we produce when communicating. A text is either spoken or written, as I just said. A text is produced either individually or collectively. This one here is being produced collectively. I'm the agent in power here, so I talk more than you do, but it is a collective text. It's made of just one sentence or made of several. Length is not important, so you can have text, very short text, and you can have very long text. It is a harmonious collection of meanings appropriate to its context. So we're starting to see that context is a powerful word in this theory, okay? It's an harmonious collection of meanings appropriate to its context. And, most important of all, it has a communicative purpose, okay? Texts have purposes. We just don't open our minds, our mouths for nothing. We talk with a purpose. We write with a purpose, okay? So texts have purposes, communicative purposes, okay? The text, this is a quote by Michael Halliday, who is the main responsible for what is now systemic functional linguistics. The text is the linguistic form of social interaction. And social interaction is the basic thing in societies. People interact with each other, okay? Do things together. It is a continuous progression of meanings, combining both simultaneously and in succession. The meanings are the selections made by the speaker from the options that constitute the meaning potential. Text is the actualization of these meaning potentials, the process of semantic choice. What is being said here is that as speakers, we have a meaning potential. Something that is up there, let us say, you know, for those who have Macs, there's these Mac clouds or these things are there, and we make use of them, okay? And the meaning potential is the system of the language. And of course, we just don't make use of all the potentiality of the language in each situation. So in each situation, we go into the potential and we make choices. For this context, for this situation, I want to use a declarative instead of an interrogative. That's a choice. And if I choose to do a declarative, then I am constrained in a way, but I have new choices to choose from, okay? So language is a system of choices. We make choices according to the context. That's what this quote says, okay? Another quote, just to make a point that is very important for what is coming next. Every text that is, everything that is said or written, we have established that already, unfolds in some context of use. Okay? Okay? So the idea of context. You can't split, you can't separate text from context. Furthermore, it is the uses of language that over tens of thousands of generations, the uses of languages over tens of thousands of generations have shaped the system. Okay? Language has evolved to satisfy human needs. And the way it is organized, this is very important, the way it is organized is functional with respect to these needs. It is not arbitrary. Look, language has evolved to satisfy human needs. Spanish is as it is because Spanish-speaking people have needs, okay? And over thousands of generations, the needs that the speakers have put into the Spanish system, linguistic system, made the linguistic system as it is now, okay? So language is organized, the way it is organized is functional with respect to the needs of the speakers, okay? What is being stressed here, it is the uses of language that have shaped the system. Language has evolved to satisfy human needs. What is being said here is that the system is shaped by use, okay? It is what we do with language that makes language to be as it is, okay? The way it is. So Spanish is the way it is because of your specific needs and uses of Spanish. Yours and the Spanish people and the Chilean and everybody that uses the language, okay? Now, from here, you can think, I know that some of you know these already, others don't. You can think that language in this structure, being structured by use, by the needs of the speakers, language performs three major functions. We use language for three basic things, or we can do three basic things with language, apart from communicating. That's the basic thing. We use languages to communicate with each other. But apart from that, apart from the function, the communicative function, there are three other functions. One is the ideational function, okay? And this ideational function is this thing. Language has a representational function. We use it to encode our experience of the world. It conveys a picture of reality. Thus, it allows us to encode meanings of experience which realize field of discourse. What does this mean? It means that I use language to represent reality. In a way, I can even say that reality doesn't exist if not via language, okay? Because it's through language that I bring it into existence, okay? And this bringing into existence language is representing it, okay? So if I say, John ate the cake, is that because there is someone in reality named John, or even fictionality, someone named John that performed the specific action, which was the action of eating a cake, okay? So language has this representational function, okay? Apart from that, language has also an interpersonal function. We use it to interact with each other, to establish relationships with each other. And Portuguese and Spanish are two languages very interesting in that respect, because we have ways of addressing each other, okay? For instance, in Portuguese, social stratification is built into the language, okay? So a student doesn't address the teacher with the second person singular, okay? Whereas in certain contexts of Spanish speakers, you can address your teacher with tú, okay, with the second person. So this has to do with the way we develop interpersonal relationships with each other. So language has an interpersonal function. We use it to encode interaction and show how defensible we find our propositions. That is, it allows us to encode meanings of attitudes, interaction, and relationships, which realize tenor of discourse. And then you have the third function, which is a textual function. Okay? Language has a textual function. We use it to organize our experiential and interpersonal meanings into a linear and coherent whole. Thus, it allows us to encode meanings of text development which realize mode of discourse. Now, if you think of these three functions as language teachers, you will probably see that if you think of the language system in terms of these three needs, as language teachers, you will probably think that your job is to concentrate yourself in ideational meanings. You have to tell your students, to teach your students how to convey representational meanings in another language. I must tell you that that's the most basic thing, and it's probably the easiest thing that we do as speakers of foreign languages. Of all these three, the most difficult function for us to grasp as foreign language speakers is the middle one, is the interpersonal one. Okay? You have to have a very good command of everything that is interpersonal for you to speak correctly a foreign language. It's the basic thing. That's what I was telling you. If you're Spanish speakers and you use a level, like in English, you have a leveled, let's just say a leveled way of address your speaker, which is you, and you is both singular and plural. Abstractiveness competence. I want you to abstract from concrete situations, abstract yourself from concrete situations and think that in all societies that we know, there are three systems in interaction, okay? Each society, no matter the level of development, sophistication, whatever you want to talk about the society or the community, each society has systems of material and symbolic culture. Each society produces material and symbolic culture, okay? Even a small community in the middle of the Amazon in Brazil, okay? Every society has a face system, a system of face. By a system of face, we understand a system of power and solidarity, a system that tells people how do they relate to each other, okay? If you go to Japan, you know that in Japan, people relate with each other in a totally different way that we relate to each other in Europe or South America or whatever. So there's realization of this abstractiveness concept, of this concept more abstract, we will see that activities are connected with fields. There is the field of fishing, where you have different activities, putting the nets together, arranging hooks, go to fishing, and fishing, arrange the fish that you fish. All these are activities in a field, the field of fishing, okay? And face systems and interpersonal relationships get ways into tenors. Tenors being relationships, types of relationships, if you like, okay? Types of relationships. And socialization systems get their way into specific modes, okay? Now, if we make these even more concrete, when we reach this level, we're talking about grammar. We're not talking anymore about societies and systems that go interacting in societies. We're talking about grammar. We're talking about transitivity, okay? Notice material and symbolic culture, production of symbolic culture, gets in the grammar in transitivity. Interpersonal relationships gets into the grammar in mood. Okay? Mood, the choice, as I was saying before, between a declarative and an interrogative. Okay? Because an interrogative and a declarative mean they both, each other, mean a different relationship with my adversary. Okay? Because if I ask someone something, I use an interrogative, and I'm developing with this person a specific type of relationship. But if I use a declarative, I'm already encoding a different type of relationship with the person. Okay? We'll see this better later on. Now, in fact, what we have here, if you like, is how you come from general things that go on in cultures, in societies, into what matters linguistically, which is text. And each one of these three things is the way in of each one of the three functions we talked about. Okay? Here you have the way in into the text, the way in of the ideational metafunction or function, the ideational function being the representational function. Remember that from a previous slide? Here you have the interpersonal function, the way in into the text through systems of face systems, solidarity and power, and you have the textual function finding its way through the text in here, socialization systems, medium, mode, and thematization, the choice of themes in texts. Okay? Now, moving from here, which is the abstract level, the concrete level, there is nothing more material than a text, whether spoken or written. From here, you can systematize information and get things like these. At the level of the bigger circle, you're talking about human societies. At the level there, the second circle, you're talking about cultural contexts. Okay? And at the level of the third cycle, you're talking about situational contexts, concrete situations. Okay? And here, with transitivity, mood, and thematization, you're actually talking about grammar. You're actually talking about the system. How, you're talking about how the three systems that interact in society got to be realized in texts. Okay? Now, the meaning potential that you have heard of is all these. Okay? Is all these but the small circle. The small circle is the system in the text. Okay? When we reach there, the system, we're actually talking about the system in the text, not the overall language system. Okay? We're talking about a specific realization. And that specific realization, we may look at it both as a specimen, which is one among other texts that will tell you how the language, the specific system is. Or we can look at the text as an artifact. If we look at the text as a specimen, we are doing a plain linguistic job. Okay? We're trying to get to the system via the texts. If we look at the texts as artifacts, we're just wondering how the text came to be that way. What were the choices? It's an artifact of a consequence of human choice. Okay? And I'm looking at the text to understand how it is the way it is. Okay? Now, getting back to the systematization, the last one was text has a communicative purpose. Okay? A communicative purpose. The unity of purpose and context, because context is very important, as we saw, the unity of purpose in a text, purpose and context, produces texture and structure. Texture, we won't be talking about it much more, refers to the way the meanings in the text fit coherently with each other. Structure refers to the way most pieces of language in use will contain certain obligatory elements appropriate to their purpose and context. And basically, here we are talking about genres, text types, if you like. Okay? A text always occurs in two contexts. One inside the other, if you like, within the other. The context of situation, the context of culture. The last slide was about the unity of purpose and context. Purpose and context have to do with the culture, because different cultures have different needs in terms of communication eventually. They do things differently from another culture. And if they do things differently from another culture, they will probably produce different types of texts to do those different things in the culture. Okay? So, two types of context: situational and context of culture. Text inside the two contexts. Text, the context of situation surrounding the text, and the context of culture surrounding the text and the culture and the context of situation. This is very important when talking about context, particularly the last quote. Context helps to express our textual meanings, thus becoming an important part of the text and its linguistic encoding. Then you have a very old quote by John Rupert Firth, a very important quote, but I want to stress the last one. Language is not realized in the abstract. It is realized as the activity of people in a situation or in situations, as the linguistic events which are manifested in a particular dialect or register. When you were taught linguistics, because you were probably taught linguistics, you never worked with context. You were given sentences out of text. Sentences like the one I just used some time ago during this lecture. John ate the cake. It's a typical linguistics sentence. But in fact, John ate the cake doesn't say anything, okay? I usually play along with my students, the undergraduates, saying, tell me what would you say about this sentence if you had to talk about it? And they say, well, it has a subject, it has a predicate, it has a complement, these kind of things. And I usually say, well, the most important thing you didn't say about the sentence. After 10 minutes of talking about the sentence, I just disappoint them saying, you didn't say anything important. The most important thing is, who the hell is John? You have to ask, who the hell is John? And not only, what cake did John eat? Because the sentence is, John ate the cake. It's not, John ate a cake. If it's the cake, we're assuming that you know which cake it was, and you don't. So ask, what cake is this, and who the hell is John?
you can't decontextualize things. You need the context for things to make meaning. Okay? That's the basic thing about here. But, well, from what I have said, now it's important for your own practice. From what I have said, it follows that every act of communication is communication for specific purposes. You have something like English for specific purposes. But in fact, when you start looking at communication, every act of communication is communication for specific purposes. Because you have specific purposes every time you talk, every time you write. Okay? So every act of communication is communication for specific purposes. And in that, it involves register and genre. Okay? These are two dimensions that need to be taken into account in language teaching practice. The notion of register and the notion of genre. The terms register, which is associated with the context of situation, and genre, which is associated with the context of culture, as we have seen, identify the two major layers of context which have an impact on text. Okay? And are therefore the two main dimensions of variation between texts. We're talking about variation, textual variation. Register and genre variation are two realizational planes in the social semiotic view of text. This view is inherently dialogic and interactive. Text, this is very important, text is both the realization of types of context. Text is the realization of types of context and the enactment of what matters to cultural members in situations. Genre. Okay? If we start looking for linguistic patterns in texts, one of the things that we can do is to see which area of activity of human experience, which social action, what is the assumed knowledge, what is taking place in the text. Okay? In fact, if we do this, we're talking of text from an ideational point of view. Remember? Ideational function of language. If you talk about or look at the text to see what is the role structure, what is the expression of attitude, what is textual formality, how people relate with each other in terms of formality, informality, you're actually dealing with the interpersonal function of language. And if you deal with the text, with its mode, whether it is spoken or written, with the symbolic organization of the text, you're actually dealing with the textual function. Or, if you prefer to talk in terms of register, you're dealing here with field, you're dealing here with tenor, and you're dealing here with mode. Okay? Now, I want to give you an example, and I'm tired of talking, and I need someone to read a text. I need a candidate to read a text. This text. Who wants to read this text? You have to project your voice for your colleagues to follow. Who wants to read the text? No one. Go on. He's a hero.
I sound with my partner support, so.
Go ahead.
Horse jumping obstacles. Various obstacles are found in competitive sports involving horse jumping. These include shower jumping, hunter, and the cross-country phase of the equestrian discipline of eventing. The size and type of obstacles vary depending on the course and the level of the horse and rider. But all horses must successfully negotiate these obstacles in order to complete a competition. Fences used in hunter and eventing are generally made to look relatively rustic and natural. In jumping competition, they are often brightly colored and creatively designed. In hunter and jumper competition, obstacles are constructed to fall down if struck with a horse. In eventing, they are built to be solid, though for safety, certain elements may be designed to break away if hit.
Thank you very much. Don't think you get away with it, because there's a second text. I need a voluntary for the second text. Ooh.
And the letter is 2. And you
Come
remember
on.
the first time you ever beat on somebody?
You complete this. You need class.
Without hitting him, my first charge, really.
Go ahead. You do it.
Also sold and battery when
He's
I
just
was
kidding.
able to clean.
Okay, I'll read it. Can you? Do you want to read it? Good. Great. Go ahead.
Can you remember the first time you ever beat up on somebody? Assaulted someone? I don't even remember my first charge. Really, I just know my first charge was assault and battery when I was a little kid. No reason for the altercation. Would beat on somebody Christmas Eve last year. I was drunk. I was smoking marijuana, drunk, intoxicated, and high. So me and a couple of my friends, we were just walking outside. So another one of my friends walking with 2 guys. So we walked over there to see what was going on. She got with the other one. They was about to beat up on my friend. So I was hurting one. I hit one of them. And then the other one tried to, and my friend caught him. And basically, I caught an assault and battery charge for that, because they didn't do too much fighting back. And when after the police was finished questioning me and my friend and stuff, they brought me home and released me to my mother. So the police was talking to my mother and all that. I was sitting in there just in panic. They was talking to my mother and stuff. After they had finished talking to my mother, I got my stepdad woke up. I don't really like him too much. My stepdad woke up and he came off. Police started talking to him. I believe that he just grabbed me up by my shirt, by my neck, and he just started swinging. And I fell back into the Christmas tree. And my first instinct when I got up was to just start hitting him. So I just hitting him everywhere. And every chance I could, police restraining me. And every time they would let me go, I would go back at him and start hitting him. So I got 2 assault and battery charges in one night. That was probably my worst experience with drugs, anger, together. You know what I'm saying. Did that get you to come here, or it played a big part in me coming here? It wasn't really why I came here. The reason why I came here was because the day before, well, a month before I got here, I got charged for something that I didn't really do. So when I went to court, the judge was about to lock me up for it. I started elbowing, shoving, saying, punched a hole in the wall, and the judge was just looking at me the whole time, just documenting stuff I was doing in the courtroom.
Thank you very much. You're also a hero. 2 texts. We're not going into detail into the text, but if I ask you for each of the texts, which text is this? What text is this? capable of saying something about the text. What is this text? What text is this?
Is that an informative text?
An informative text, okay. What else?
Could be descriptive too?
Yes, what else? It's about what? Horse jumping. Okay. Where would you find this type of text?
Magazines.
Magazines? Specialized magazines?
In EFL books. In EFL books.
Okay, and apart from that? Encyclopedias? Yes.
Notice.
Context where horse jumping is defined. And what about this one? What is this text?
It's a transcription.
Is what?
It's a transcription.
A police interrogation? Do you think it's a police interrogation? Well, what is it about? What is it about? Sorry? Okay, but what is it about? What are they talking about? They are talking about experience with drugs, violence, imprisonment, these kind of things, okay? Management of anger, these kind of things. Okay, good. For each of these texts, we could perform here a small exercise. I won't be performing it because we don't have the time. But to help for horse jumping obstacles, you could consider the area of activity, the social action, the assumed knowledge for each one of these texts. You could, for each one of the texts, think about the role structure, the expression of attitude, the textual formality, and you could also think about mode, symbolic organization. What you're doing if you do this, you're doing a register analysis, let us say. You're saying something about the context or situation of these texts. But notice that you will be saying something about the context of situation of the text only from the text. Okay? If you notice, in fact, first point, field, ideational meanings, it's a case of a representation of human experience associated with horse riding and particularly with horse jumping. That's what the text is about. Okay? And can you prove it? Yes, I can prove it. Horse jumping, jumping hunter, the equestrian discipline of eventing, obstacles, horses, fences, in jumping competition, all these are words, sentences, structures that make me believe that we are talking about horse jumping or horse riding, and particularly horse jumping. Okay? Now, tenor, interpersonal meanings. Two participants, the author of the text and its readers, a formal relationship, distant, kind of distance between the reader, the writer and the reader. No expression or of person or interpersonal marks. Nothing is shown there. I didn't highlight anything from that point of view because it's not there. It's very distant, very formal, strict in that sense. Provider, the relationship is provider of information, beneficiary of information relationship. It's this kind of relationship, okay? So, second level, tenor. Third level, mode. Written mode, high use of declaratives and of expositive rhetoric dimension, use of passive, in homology with the absence of expression of person and interpersonal marks. And you have it all there. Various obstacles are found in competitive sports. Fences used in hunter and event are generally made to look, in hunter, obstacles are constructed to fall down, etc., etc. Okay? If you look at this one from the point of view of field, representation of human experience connected to physical violence, and its legal and social consequences, imprisonment. Okay? So, beat up on somebody, assaulted someone, first charge, assault and battery, about to beat up on my friend, start hitting him. The judge was about to lock me up for his elbow and shoving, saying, punch the hole in the wall. So these are all examples that show what type of film we're dealing with. Two participants, professional relationship. This part you don't know, but you can get it from the text actually. Two participants, professional relationship. It's an interviewer-interviewee relationship. Okay? Second person address form, can you remember, you ever, you know. Asymmetrical power relation, both professionally and socio-culturally. Okay? It's an asymmetrical power relation. What you have is an interviewer who is free, who is not imprisoned, okay, free in this sense. High literacy and social status, this person. Can you remember? Did that get you to come here? And the interview imprisoned, low literacy and social status. So me and a couple of my friends, they was about to beat up on my friend. I was hurting one. The reason why I came here was because they was talking to my mother and stuff. That is structures that show a lower level of literacy and a lower status. In fact, we can even say that the interaction is between an interviewer whose race we don't know with an interviewee that we know it is a black person because he uses characteristics of black English. Okay? So it's there in the text. Do you know what I mean? You get the context from the text. Spoken mode, conversational, question and answer structure, interview, with short questions and long answer, interrogatives exclusively in interviewer's terms, and a rhetorical narrative dimension in the interviewee. He talks about his personal experience. Okay? So, past temporal marks, past tenses, and discursive functions associated with it, declarative clauses. One uses interrogative, the interviewer, the other one uses declarative, and a dimension of narrative in what he says. Christmas Eve last year, I was drunk, was smoking marijuana, drunk, intoxicated and high. A month before I got here, I got charged for something that high. Okay? Now, this is the most basic thing that you can take out of this experience. From the context, you can get textual prediction, and, as we just did, from a text, you can do contextual deduction, which means that having texts, we deduce context. Why? Well, because contexts get into the texts. Okay? And if we don't have the texts, we have the context, as you know as language teachers. Because that's what you do regularly with your students. Whenever you do role play with your students, you ask them to perform a role. Okay? Now you are the customer and your colleague is the provider or the person in the cashier at the supermarket. And you're going to buy for your shopping things, or what in the supermarket is you're going to pass by the cashier and buy. So you're providing the context, and you know what it will come from this context as a text. Okay? So from context, we predict text. Okay? Given the description of the context, it should be possible to predict the meanings that will be at risk and the linguistic features likely to be used to encode them. Alternatively, given a text, it should be possible to deduce the context in which it was produced, as the linguistic features selected in a text will encode contextual dimensions, both of its immediate context of production, of its generic identity, genre, and what task the text is achieving in the culture. Okay? Now, what can you do with these in terms of teaching, language teaching? Well, you do it intuitively in role play. But it would be interesting to think that role play is building a context for a text to be produced. Okay, so change one of the variables in the context, that is, change one variable, for instance, in terms of tenor, keep all the other variables, the same subject, you're doing the same thing, talking about the same thing, writing about the same thing, you're doing the same type of text, interaction, whatever, but you have changed the power relationship between the people. How does that reflect in terms of the text? Okay? So you can do these experiences in class, changing one of the dimensions of the register. So this is just to systematize the variables of register, field, tenor, mode. Tilde is about the subject of the text, about the activity that is going on in the text. Tenor is about power and solidarity, how relationships are expressed via language. And mode is about the medium, about the message, how the message is constructed. Okay? If you think about the functions of language, which we refer here to meta-functions, ideational meanings are resources for construing content, and in texts, they are field, the social action. Interpersonal meanings, resources for interaction, are tenor in terms of register, that is, the relationship, the role structure. And textual meanings, that is, the textual meta-function, are resources for the organization of texts. Okay? And in terms of relationship, context, text, it has to do with mode, the symbolic organization. Now, registers, those who were at my previous talks know this slide already. Those that weren't, this is the first time you're looking at it. Types of text can be considered in terms of register and in terms of genre. Register is functional variations in the semantic system. Functional variations, so far you change one of the variables and you're changing the text, as I was telling you just now. And genres are varieties, different types of staged, goal-oriented social processes. Okay? Because we do things in the culture on a regular basis. We repeat things. Okay? Of course, you don't buy pants and dresses the same way you buy coffee in a coffee machine. But actually you do. You don't buy the same way in the sense that at the coffee machine you ask the coffee shop, you ask for coffee, and you ask for bread, and you ask for water, whatever. And when you go and buy pants or dresses or whatever, you ask for dresses and pants. So it is a different situation, it is a different text. But in terms of the genre, if you like, the structure of the text is basically the same. Okay? It is performed repeatedly. You arrive and say, hello, good morning, how are you? And the other side says, I'm fine, thank you, what would you like? What are you going to have today? I'd like a croissant and a cup of coffee. Here you are, it's, I don't know how many pesos or euros or whatever. Here you are, thank you, bye-bye, and you're off. And then you go and buy a dress or pants. You try the dress, you arrive, you say, I'm looking for, hello, good morning, I'm looking for dresses. Of course, there are these, you can choose from here, and you choose the dress, you go and pay, it's this much. It's basically the same thing. Genres are regular ways of writing texts, okay? No matter the texts being different, because they vary according to the context of situations. So in a way, register is what makes text different, and genre is what makes text similar. Okay, so it seems like a contradiction, But it isn't, okay? Because this is the power of language, and this is the force. You have one force that makes text different, and you have an opposite force that makes text similar, and they work together, okay? And that is why you can predict texts from contexts, and you can also deduce context from texts, okay? That's why. It's because of that. So this is, as I usually say, a centrifugal force. This is a centripetal force. You know the difference between centrifugal and centripetal? That is, they both work opposite ways, but they stabilize the language. And language needs to be stable for us to communicate with each other. If it's not stable, we won't communicate. We will be using language differently, each other, each one of us. Okay? Now, just to tell you about genre, this is the first generation of the word to genre in systemic functional linguistics. This is a rather speedy way of showing things, but just to make sure that you know what we are talking about when we talk about genres. When we're talking about genres, we're talking about stories, we're talking about text responses, the way we react to other texts, no matter the text means verbal or visual or whatever, we react to the text. Arguments, reports, explanations, procedures. Okay? Procedures is a very interesting text to do at the foreign language class, foreign language teaching class. Procedure. Tell your colleague, role play again, tell your colleague how you go from here to the library. Okay? Tell your colleague what he must do to set the table, something like these. These are procedures. First you do these, then you do these, and we keep on performing texts like these in our daily life. Now, you will be hearing in the future, I guess, about this is the teaching learning cycle, and the teaching learning cycle starts with the deconstruction, goes to joint construction and independent construction. What can you do with this? Well, what you do already. You have, I guess, in your teaching practice, what you call pre-reading activities. Okay? You take a text to class, and before you work with the text, you do some pre-reading activities with the text. Okay? So you set the context, let us say, for the reading of the text. In a way, you're deconstructing the text. You're making it possible for your student to get into the text. And this is very important because this is a practice that language teachers do, well, foreign language teachers do, that mother tongue language teachers don't do. And this is a very important thing for the students to learn what the text is about, etc., etc. So the pre-reading activities are a very important thing to do. It's the deconstruction, it's the setting up the field, okay? The field as a variable of register, setting up the field. Then at a certain stage, you can work with your students the structure in terms of genre, the structure of that text, okay? Notice that this text is, let us say, an argument. And it starts with a thesis, and then it develops with argument 1, argument 2, argument 3 to prove the thesis. And it ends with a summary of the thesis as a means of conclusion. This is the basic structure of an argumentative text. Okay? Now, if your text is an argumentative one, you can work with your students to let him or her know that this is the structure. And then you put your students to jointly construct the same type of text, but you have changed
the fields of the register. Okay? You have changed, you keep everything similar, but you have changed the field. Instead of wanting him or her to write an argumentative text on the advantages or disadvantages of smoking, which was the original text, you want now for him or her to write a text on the advantages or disadvantages of bicycle riding. I'm just inventing things, okay? But this is what you can do according to this cycle. This is a very, I'm just going through for you to know that there are materials, and I'm going to give you materials for things that you can do in class with these things. This is a rather complex network of possible genres that you can use with your students. But notice that in this genre, you have the explanation of what the genre is, and this is the most significant part in this field. You know what the texts do, okay? You have the stages of the text. You have seen this already in a different shape. I'm showing it now here, just for you to know that at this level, we're talking in terms of metafunctions, but metafunctions also find their way in terms of tenor and mode, okay? This being registered, okay? This is context level 1, which is the situation. And then you have context level 2, which is the cultural, is the level of genre, okay? It's above and beyond the metafunctions. So, whereas you can completely predict these, you can completely predict field, tenor, and mode, you can't completely predict genre, okay? But there are ways of doing it, but you can't completely do it. That's why this line doesn't go along here, okay? These three things don't get into genre, because genre is purpose in communication and structure, stages in the text. And that has nothing to do with field, tenor, and mode. But you can put together genre and field, for instance, and when you put together genre and field, you're producing texts in biology, for instance, or in geography, or in history. You're changing the field, okay? But if you change the field, you most likely, in terms of disciplines, subject areas, you most likely are changing the genre too, because a change in the field, in this case, brings in a change in the genre. There are certain specific genres you do in one discipline, other genres you do in another discipline. So, in terms of English language teaching, the most regular genres that you do are stories, both recounts and narratives, and you do also argumentative texts with your students. You do procedures. You may do some historical recount, depending on the level of that you are teaching. Some historical recount. You do some biography of other people, the subject, the author writing about other people, and you do some autobiography. You put your students to talk about them, say something about that. So, a personal recount, that is. These are the genres that you will be using. But the genres that you will be using are different from the genres of other disciplines. Okay? Now, just to finish, this is the last slide just for you to think about this. Imagine that you're teaching a class and you start with a text type. Okay? So, after selecting the text type, which will be the focus of the unit of work, a set of examples of the text type is collected. Okay? So if you want your students to know about procedures, you find different procedures. Okay? find different texts that are procedures. And you call your students' attention to the fact that in our daily life we have tons of procedures. We always think of them as different texts, but they belong to the same genre. Telling your colleague how to go from the classroom into the library is a procedure. But telling your colleague how you bake a carrot cake is a procedure. Telling your colleague how he can put the toner in the printer, it's a procedure. Okay? So you bring in different texts, but they all of the same text style. The set of texts exemplifies different language varieties, which can be mapped in terms of the register frameworks. Okay? Each one of these texts has a different register. They belong to the same genre. What makes texts similar is genre. They are similar in terms of genre, but they are all different texts. And they're all different texts because of the register language. So you bring the register language. This approach is particularly useful if learners need multiple opportunities to work with a text type, or if they need opportunities to build portable skills based on register variations. And then you have here what you can do in terms of each one of the variables of register. Okay? This is from a chapter from a book, which is written like this, not in a complete text way. It's written with headings, and you can do this type of thing starting with a text type, or starting with an activity, or starting with a situation specific. Okay? So I will be giving you the slides of the presentation, but I will be giving you also this chapter because I find it very useful for you to go through it and eventually do something like that in your classrooms with your teachers. Now I'm open to questions, and I hope there are some questions. Maybe not. Maybe yes. Questions? Yes.
Can genre-based instruction be applied to lower levels of proficiency?
Yeah. Well, yes, you can. You can start. Well, depends. It depends. We're talking about lower levels of proficiency in the foreign language, but it depends also on the level of proficiency in the mother tongue. So if we're talking of ordinary, regular students in the mainstream educational system, which is students from 6, I imagine, I don't know, when do they start the foreign language in Colombia? At what time? First grade, they start there. First grade, primary. Good, that's good. Is it only English or another? Mostly some French. That's good. We have that, but it's only English on the first grade. So they start quite soon. So one thing is that case in which you have to choose the genres that are mostly used by the child in her mother tongue context, everyday context, so that she can make the transfer. If you're talking about adult contexts, you have to choose texts or genres that are adapted to another learner, even though he or she has a lower level of proficiency in the foreign language. Okay, but you have to be careful. Bringing texts for lower proficiency levels, it depends on also the age of the person you're teaching with. Okay, no, it is recommendable. You have to be careful and choose the text accordingly. So I would say that, for instance, for first graders, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds in the first grade, well, they probably don't produce that many texts in terms of writing because they are learning the words, they're learning the spelling. They are also learning in their first language. They are learning the alphabet and writing and all that. So when they start producing text, which I would say is the third grade, producing text as text, this text will be small recounts, things that like during the weekend I went with my parents to some place, something like this, quite simple. Or some observation comments text, which are the spring has arrived and the trees and flowers, and the trees are in flower, something like this, okay? Everything like that. And so you can do this and explain the structure of the text to the child. It's a basic structure. All the two texts that I'm referring to, the type of text that I'm referring to, basically have two stages. So you can apply these lower level. Yes, go ahead. Go on.
Well, my question is, the way we can use this in the teaching context is the same than the way we can use it in another context. I mean, maybe in legal contexts or politic contexts.
Yeah, yeah. You just adapt it to the context, because whatever I was saying, don't forget that the main basic thing is each act of communication is communication for a specific purpose. So I'm ahead, let's just say, of what is ESP. So if I think that each act of communication is communication for specific purposes, I can easily move into English for specific purposes and all the purposes around, okay? Because I'm looking at contexts, I'm looking at the genres of a specific area or field, and teach these to my students. So the first thing, imagine that you're working with English for specific purposes. Your students are students of economics or management or whatever. The first thing you have to do is to make sure of the text. You do a mapping of the genres used in that discipline. What that student in his area needs to write. And you pick up some examples, you work on those examples, and you see the structure of the text, and you introduce it, explain to the student. But you have to be sure that you are explaining. There is a specific area in ESP which is connected with this, which is called genre analysis. A man called Swales developed, and an American guy. And this is basically what I am saying. It is knowing the specific genres and teaching the students how to produce these genres using the proper register.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we use this type of analysis to help students develop a speed in their reading process?
Not sure I heard the second part. Can you repeat the question, sorry?
Can we use this type of analysis
Yes.
to help students develop speed in their reading process?
Yes, yes, because that was what I was not speaking about, because I was more at the theoretical level. But you can actually, because in that thing here, if you pick up this and think of the teaching process as a teaching cycle, teaching learning cycle, the deconstruction is in fact towards control of the genre. Okay? So in the deconstruction, I just said that you probably do these because you do pre-reading activities. But the pre-reading activities are not all that you do in the deconstruction moment. In the deconstruction moment, as a consequence of the reading, when the students are reading the text, you are calling their attention to the structure of the text. And you're calling their attention to how the text unfolds to fulfill a certain purpose. Okay? How the purpose is connected with the staging of the text, or if you like, how the staging is connected with the purpose of the text. So, in fact, you're doing both things. You're teaching the student to read the text in a better way, and at the same time, you're telling the student or teaching the student to perform better in terms of text production based on a better reading of the text. So you get to produce based on the reading. So there is a very strong component of reading in the deconstruction. Deconstruction, in a way, is reading to get the meaning, the actual meaning of the text. Okay? It's not reading just for the purpose of automatic reading. Now, it's reading to retrieve information, but retrieve information not only of the field, but also of the genre. Okay? Purpose and staging. Yeah.
Thank you.
Someone else?
I have a question.
You have a question.
Generic functional linguistics is a very good teaching one. But do you believe traditional ways of teaching grammar should be avoided, or would they come to the systemic portion of linguistics?
Well, by traditional, you can't put so many things under the label of tradition that I would say yes and no. For certain traditional things, I would say that you should avoid. For certain traditional things, I would say no, use it. It depends. I can say, I think that the teaching of grammar should be explicit. This is the first thing. I think the teaching of grammar should be explicit, but textually based. Okay? So I don't believe that grammar should be taught with decontextualized sentences. I don't believe on, okay, let's learn the passive. And the passive is like this. You teach them the structure of the passive. No, that's the wrong way of doing it. The best way of doing it is show them a text like this. Examples. This is a text full of passive. Okay? And you explain better the use of the passive as a certain point of view. When you use a passive, you're expressing the point of view. Passives and actives express point of view. Let me tell you about John. John ate the cake. Let me tell you about the cake. The cake was eaten by John. You see? Different points of view. I'm departing from one way to express meaning, I'm departing from another way, different points of view. So I think that the passive, for instance, is better explained this way because they know how to do the passive. Okay? They find it in texts. They know how to perform the passive. They don't need probably to know that when you have a passive, you change the subject into something else and you change the complement into something. You see? This is the structural modification that you know into. What is important is the meaning in context of the passage. For instance, I have a wonderful text to explain the passage in Portuguese, which is two newspaper news in the newspaper about the same fact. And the fact was a prisoner of war was made prisoner. A soldier was imprisoned by the enemy. Okay? We're talking about the conflict several years ago in Yugoslavia, when Yugoslavia started fragmenting the conflict in Kosovo. And what we have there is that a prisoner was made prisoner. And we have one text, one newspaper, that made these the main purpose. And the thing is, a prisoner, if we want to talk about a prisoner is a patient of other people's actions. Okay? If you make it the purpose of what you're writing about, you have to produce passage. So the text is full of passage. The prisoner was visited last year or last week by the Red Cross. The prisoner was made prisoner in something like this. The soldier, it keeps changing meanings, but it's always passage. The other text, the other newspaper, has chosen to talk about the same fact, but to talk about the fact that the newspapers in the country of the soldier kept silent about it. So it only has passives when talking in specific points about the soldier. But the majority of the rest, the majority of the other sentences are not about the soldier. So normal passive. You see, this is a wonderful way of explaining what a passive and active is in terms of language teaching. That's the possibility.
Dr. Gouveia, thank you very much. Very, very
Thank you.
It was a very powerful lecture presentation today. We will continue because we have more classes and students have to have lunch. So I know you have to go back. Some of you here, some others in other classrooms. So well, the rest.
Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.